My name is Angelina, and I am 35 years old. Today, as I prepared for an executive meeting at the media company I now run, an email notification caught my attention. The sender's name made my heart stop. Karen Reynolds. The same Karen who convinced my father I was dangerous when I was 16. The same Karen who got me thrown out of my childhood home. Now she needs a job, and I am the one who decides. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to rebuild your life after someone betrayed you. Trust me, you will want to see how karma works in mysterious ways. Growing up, I had what many would consider an ideal childhood. My mother was the foundation of our home, a woman with a gentle spirit but unwavering principles. She always emphasized the importance of honesty, something that would later become painfully ironic in my life. Always speak your truth, Angelina, she would tell me while braiding my hair before school, even when it is difficult, even when others might not want to hear it. My father, Thomas, was a successful accountant who worked long hours but always made time for our family on weekends. Before everything fell apart, I remember him as a doting father who would bring me books from his business trips and listen attentively to my rambling stories about school and friends. Our home in suburban Chicago was modest but comfortable. My room was my sanctuary, walls covered with posters of my favorite bands and shelves filled with books. I was always a reader, escaping into fictional worlds and nurturing dreams of becoming a writer someday. My mother encouraged this passion, buying me journals and attending every school event where I presented my work. "You have a gift for words," she would say carefully, storing my school essays and creative writing projects in a special box. Someday, these might be valuable artifacts from a famous author. When I was 13, our world shattered. Mum was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. The disease had already spread to her bones and liver by the time they caught it. The prognosis was grim from the start, but my parents tried to shield me from the worst of it. I remember the day they sat me down in our living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in a golden light that felt at odds with the darkness of their news. "Angelina, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice steady, despite the fear I could see in her eyes. "I am very sick, and the doctors are going to try to help me get better." I watched as my father held her hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. Later that night, I heard him crying in their bathroom, a sound so unfamiliar and frightening that I buried my head under my pillow to block it out. The next 14 months were a blur of hospital visits, the sharp smell of antiseptic becoming as familiar as the scent of my own home. I watched my vibrant mother shrink into a shell of herself, her beautiful brown hair falling out in clumps, her skin turning a sallow yellow as her liver failed. Throughout it all, my father was her constant companion. He took family leave from work to drive her to treatments, held her hair back when she was sick, and learned to cook the few foods she could still tolerate. In those months, I saw a tenderness in him that solidified my belief that he would always be my protector too. "When Mum is gone, it will just be you and me," he told me one evening as we sat in the hospital cafeteria while Mum slept upstairs. "But I promise I will always be there for you, Angelina. We will get through this together." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? He had never given me reason to doubt his word. During Mum's final weeks, we spent every possible moment together as a family. We looked through old photo albums, watched her favorite classic films, and she even mustered the strength to help me bake her famous chocolate chip cookies one last time. The recipe was written in her beautiful handwriting, a treasure I would later lose along with so much else. "Take care of your father," she whispered to me the night before she died. "And never lose your voice, my brave girl." The funeral was a blur. I remember standing beside my father as countless people told me how sorry they were, how brave I was, how much I looked like my mother. Inside, I felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out everything that made me who I was and left only an empty shell. The following months were difficult, but in their way precious. Dad and I grieved together, creating new routines and learning to exist in a house that felt too quiet without Mum. He tried his best to fill both parental roles awkwardly, helping me shop for clothes and asking about my day over the simple dinners he managed to prepare. "We are doing okay, right?" he would ask periodically, a vulnerability in his voice that made me always respond affirmatively, even on days when I felt anything but okay. I threw myself into school and writing, filling journal after journal with my thoughts and memories of Mum. My English teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, became a sort of mentor, encouraging me to channel my grief into creative expression. For a while, it seemed like Dad and I were finding our way forward, honouring Mum's memory while learning to live without her. Looking back now, those 15 months after Mum died were a temporary reprieve, before the storm that would sweep away everything I thought I knew about family love and belonging. Had I known what was coming, perhaps I would have cherished those days more difficult as they were. But life rarely gives us warning before it changes course. 15 months after we lost Mum, Dad came home from work with a strange expression on his face. He asked me to put on a nice outfit and meet him in the living room for a talk. Something about his nervous energy put me on edge, but I complied, choosing a simple blue dress Mum had bought me for my 8th grade graduation. "Angelina," he began, clearing his throat awkwardly, "I have met someone. Her name is Karen. She works in marketing at a firm that does business with my company." I remember feeling like the floor had tilted beneath me. It was not that I expected Dad to remain alone forever, but the timing felt sudden. Mum had been gone barely over a year. "She has 2 children, he continued, avoiding my eyes. "Tyler is 10 and Madison is 8. They are great kids. I think you will really like them." He went on to explain that he had been seeing Karen for 3 months. The revelation that this had been going on while I thought we were grieving together stung like a physical blow. "I have invited them for dinner this weekend," he finished. "I really want this to go well, Angelina. Karen is special to me." When Saturday arrived, I tried my best to be open-minded. I put on another nice outfit, helped Dad clean the house, and even baked cookies using Mum's recipe, though the gesture felt like a small betrayal. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Karen Reynolds stood on our porch holding a bottle of wine with 2 children flanking her sides. My first impression was that she was pretty in a manufactured way, highlighted blonde hair, carefully applied makeup, and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "You must be Angelina," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Your father talks about you all the time." The children, Tyler and Madison, mumbled reluctant hellos. Tyler was lanky with his mother's blonde hair, while Madison was smaller with a cascade of curls and a wary expression. That dinner set the pattern for what was to come. On the surface, everything was pleasant. Karen complimented the food, asked appropriate questions about my school and activities, and managed her children's behavior with quiet efficiency. But there was something underneath the performance that made me uneasy, like the feeling before a thunderstorm when the air pressure changes. I caught her looking around our home with an appraising eye, as though mentally redecorating. When Dad showed her photos of our family vacation to Yellowstone, she smiled politely but quickly redirected the conversation to her own recent trip to Cabo San Lucas. "These children need a mother figure," she said at one point, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "And your father deserves happiness again." It was hard to argue with either sentiment, though the presumption that she would be fulfilling these roles felt premature and presumptuous. Over the following weeks, Karen and her children became regular fixtures in our home. Dad started spending more and more time with them, coming home later from work or going straight to Karen's house. When he was home, our conversations shifted. Instead of asking about my writing or friends, he began to focus on small criticisms. "Maybe you should wear something nicer when Karen comes over," or "Karen thinks you spend too much time in your room." Karen's influence became more apparent with each visit. She suggested different dinner options because Tyler does not eat that, or new household rules because Madison goes to bed at 8:30. Small things adjustments that were not unreasonable on their own, but together represented a shift in our household dynamics that felt threatening. 6 months after their first dinner at our house, Dad announced that Karen and her children would be moving in with us. The explanation was practical, her lease was ending, and it made financial sense. But the real message was clear. They were becoming a permanent part of our lives. "You will need to share your room with Madison," Dad informed me. "We will move your desk into the guest room so you can still have a quiet place to study and write." The idea of sharing my private space, my sanctuary since Mum died, was devastating, but I swallowed my objections, not wanting to seem selfish or difficult. After all, Dad deserved happiness, did not he? Madison moved into my room on a rainy Saturday. She brought pink bedding, stuffed animals, and a collection of glittery accessories that transformed half the space into a sparkly kingdom that clashed with my more subdued decor. She was polite but distant, clearly as uncomfortable with the arrangement as I was. Tyler, meanwhile, claimed the basement recreation room as his domain. What had once been a shared family space became filled with his video game sports equipment and friends who looked at me like an intruder when I dared to enter. The first real conflict came when I discovered Tyler had taken a signed first edition book that had been a gift from Mum. When I confronted him, he denied it, but I later found it under his bed, several pages torn. "It was an accident," he insisted when I showed the damaged book to Dad and Karen. "I just wanted to look at it." Karen immediately jumped to his defense. "He said it was an accident, Angelina. Children make mistakes. You need to learn to share your things. Dad said nothing, just looked uncomfortable, and suggested we all try harder to respect each other's belongings. That night I cried into my pillow, feeling Mom's presence fading from our home with each new change. I wrote in my journal, "It is like they are trying to erase all evidence that Mom ever existed. Dad does not even stand up for me anymore." Little did I know this was just the beginning of a systematic campaign to push me out of my own home and my father's life. A year after Mom's death, Dad and Karen announced their engagement. The wedding was planned for 3 months later, a small ceremony in Karen's church, followed by a reception at an upscale restaurant. I was asked to be a junior bridesmaid alongside Madison, who seemed as unenthusiastic about the role as I was. "We are going to be a real family," Karen declared during dinner the night they announced their engagement. The Reynolds family. The fact that she expected me to take her last name went unaddressed. I had been Angelina Crawford my whole life, the name connecting me to both my parents. The thought of becoming Angelina Reynolds felt like erasing another piece of Mom. After the wedding, changes accelerated. Karen redecorated our home, replacing furniture that Mom had carefully selected, changing wall colours and rearranging rooms to better suit our blended family. Photos of Mom that had been displayed prominently were moved to less visible locations, then gradually disappeared altogether. When I asked Dad about a particular photo of Mum and me at the beach that had been removed from the hallway, he seemed flustered. "Karen thought we should update the family pictures," he explained weakly. "We can put that one in your room if you want." But even my room was no longer truly mine. Madison complained about my creepy band posters, so they came down. My bookshelves had to be rearranged to make room for her toys. The journals where I poured out my grief and confusion were no longer safe, as I once caught her flipping through pages. At 15, I tried my best to adapt. I joined the school newspaper, finding solace in writing articles and staying late for editing sessions. I made new friends who did not know the complicated dynamics of my home life. I maintained excellent grades, hoping my academic success might earn back some of Dad's attention and approval. Instead, my achievements seemed to irritate Karen. When I brought home an award for a regional essay contest, she barely glanced at it, before launching into praise for Tyler's participation in his soccer game despite his team's loss. "Not everyone can be good at sitting alone and writing," she said with a dismissive wave toward my certificate. "Tyler is developing important social skills through team sports." Dad, who once would have proudly displayed my award on the refrigerator, merely nodded along with Karen's assessment. The household rules continued to evolve, always seeming to work against my interests. My curfew was earlier than friends my age despite my responsible behaviour. I was assigned more household chores than Tyler or Madison. My requests for rides to library study groups or writing workshops were frequently denied due to inconvenience, while Karen never missed Tyler's games or Madison's dance recitals. More concerning were the new narratives developing about my character and behaviour. If something went missing, Karen would ask if I had seen it, with a tone implying suspicion. If Madison was upset, Karen would question whether I had said something to hurt her feelings. If Tyler performed poorly on a test, somehow, the disruption of my late studying had affected his sleep. "Angelina has been very moody lately," I overheard Karen telling Dad one night. "I am concerned about how it is affecting Madison and Tyler. Children are so impressionable at their ages." Dad's response was muffled, but I caught phrases like teenage phase and still processing grief, which at least acknowledged the source of my struggles, even if he offered no real defense. Karen's campaign extended beyond our home. She began to control my access to my father's side of the family. Visits to my paternal grandparents became less frequent, always with excuses about scheduling conflicts or the children's activities. When relatives did visit, Karen was expert at monopolizing conversations and steering them away from topics involving me or memories of Mum. My journal entries from this period reveal increasing isolation and confusion. Sometimes I feel like I am going crazy. Karen acts one way when Dad is around and completely different when he is not. Today she told me my outfit made me look desperate for attention, but when Dad came home, she complimented the same clothes. Tyler broke my science project today and told his mum I had threatened to get back at him. I never said anything like that. Karen believed him without even asking me. Dad just looked tired and said we all needed to try harder to get along. Found Madison going through my desk today. When I asked her to stop, she started crying and ran to Karen. Somehow ended up being punished for making Madison cry. This is insane. The gaslighting was subtle but effective. By the time I turned 16, I had begun to doubt my own perceptions and memories. Was I really as difficult as Karen suggested? Was I imagining the preferential treatment given to her children? Was my grief for Mum making me oversensitive and paranoid? Through it all, I tried to maintain my connection with Dad, seeking moments alone with him that became increasingly rare. When we did talk, our conversations were superficial, nothing like the deep discussions we had shared during that year after Mum died. It was as though a wall had been built between us brick by brick with Karen as the architect. I did not realize then that this wall was about to become an impassable fortress, with me permanently on the outside. The day everything imploded started like any other. I woke up, got ready for school, and headed downstairs for breakfast, bracing myself for the usual morning tension. Karen was at the kitchen island reviewing something on her tablet while Madison and Tyler ate cereal at the table. "Good morning," I said, receiving only a distracted nod from Karen and silence from the kids. I grabbed a granola bar and my lunch from the refrigerator, eager to escape the cold atmosphere. As I turned to leave, Karen spoke without looking up. "Angelina, we need to talk when you get home from school today. Your father will be leaving work early." Something in her tone sent a chill through me. "Is everything okay?" "Just be home by 4, she replied finally, meeting my eyes with a look I could not interpret. The school day passed in a blur of anxiety. I texted my best friend Zoe between classes. "Family meeting after school. Sounds serious. Probably getting blamed for something again." Zoe responded with supportive emojis and an offer to call her afterward. She was one of the few people who understood the dynamics at home, having witnessed Karen's behavior during the rare times she had been allowed to visit. I arrived home at exactly 4 o'clock, my stomach knotting as I entered the unusually quiet house. Dad and Karen were sitting in the living room, their postures stiff and formal. Madison and Tyler were nowhere to be seen. "Sit down, Angelina," Dad said, his voice flat in a way I had never heard before. I perched on the edge of the sofa across from them, clutching my backpack in my lap like a shield. "We need to discuss some very serious concerns." Karen began, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Things have been brought to our attention that cannot be ignored." Dad cleared his throat. "Madison came to Karen very upset yesterday. She said you have been threatening her." The accusation was so unexpected that I laughed, a short, shocked sound that immediately seemed to confirm their worst suspicions. "I have not threatened anyone," I protested. "That is completely untrue." Karen reached for a folder on the coffee table and removed several sheets of paper. "We found these in your desk." She handed them to my father, who looked at them with a pained expression before passing them to me. They were notes written in what appeared to be my handwriting, containing disturbing messages about Madison and Tyler. Things like, "They should be afraid of what I might do," and "No one would miss them if they disappeared." The handwriting was a close approximation of mine, but not quite right. The phrasing was nothing I would ever write. I felt sick looking at them. "These are not mine," I said, my voice shaking. "I did not write these. Someone is trying to set me up." Karen's expression hardened. "Madison told us you showed these to her, told her to read them when she was alone. She has been terrified to be in the same room with you. She has been having nightmares." I turned to my father, desperate for him to see through this obvious manipulation. "Dad, you know me. You know I would never do this. Someone forged these notes." Dad would not meet my eyes. "Tyler found your journal last week," he said quietly. "He read some very disturbing things, Angelina. Things that concerned him enough to show Karen. My private journal. The one place I expressed my raw, unfiltered feelings about the situation at home. Tyler had violated my privacy, and instead of being punished for it, his snooping was being used against me. My journal is private," I said, anger now mixing with my fear. "And whatever Tyler claims he read, I guarantee he is either lying or twisting my words." Karen's face took on an expression of rehearsed sympathy. "Angelina, we have been concerned about your behavior for some time. The isolation, the mood swings, the hostility toward Madison and Tyler. These notes just confirm what we have suspected." "Which is what exactly?" I challenged. Dad finally spoke, his voice heavy. "That you might need help we cannot provide. That you might be," he hesitated, "dangerous." The word hung in the air like poison. Dangerous. My own father thought I was dangerous. Dr. Phillips mentioned that sometimes trauma can manifest in unexpected ways. Karen added, referencing the family therapist she had insisted we see a few times after the wedding. A therapist who had spent most of our sessions focusing on how I was adjusting to the new family dynamic. "You have been through a lot losing your mother so young," Karen continued, her voice dripping with false compassion. "No one is blaming you for having difficulties, but we need to consider what is best for everyone." I looked from Karen to my father and back again, reality dawning with horrifying clarity. This was not a discussion. This was a sentencing. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Dad rubbed his face with his hands, suddenly looking much older than his 46 years. "We think it would be best if you stayed with your grandmother for a while, just until we can get things sorted out." My grandmother, Sarah, my mother's mother, lived in Boston, nearly 1,000 miles away. We had visited her occasionally when Mum was alive, but since her death, contact had been limited to holiday phone calls and birthday cards. "You are sending me away because of lies." My voice broke on the last word, tears threatening to spill over. "They are not lies, Angelina," Karen said firmly. "We have the evidence right here, and there have been other incidents you know about. The missing jewelry, Madison's torn clothes, Tyler's broken gaming controller. All things I had been accused of, but had not done. All things that had more likely been staged or done by the children themselves to frame me." "Dad," I pleaded, turning to him directly, ignoring Karen entirely. "Mum would never believe this about me. You know that." At the mention of Mum, something flickered across his face. A moment of doubt, perhaps, but Karen quickly stepped in. "That is unfair, Angelina, using your mother's memory to manipulate the situation." Dad seemed to harden then, as if my invocation of Mum had been a betrayal rather than an appeal to the truth of who I was. "Your grandmother has agreed to take you," he said with finality. "We have arranged for you to finish the school year there. You will leave on Saturday." "This weekend?" "But what about my friends, my classes, the newspaper?" Panic rose in my chest at the sudden timeline. "We have already spoken to the school," Karen replied smoothly. "They understand the situation and will transfer your records." Yeah, the situation. What exactly had they told the school that I was disturbed, violent, dangerous to other students? "What did you tell them?" I demanded. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Just that we were dealing with some behavioral issues and that a change of environment might help." Behavioral issues. As if I was an unruly toddler rather than a straight A student who had never been in trouble at school. "This is insane," I said, standing up, the papers falling from my lap to the floor. "You are choosing them over me. You are choosing her over Mom's daughter." "That is enough, Angelina," Dad snapped, finally showing emotion, but it was anger directed at me. "This attitude is exactly the problem. Your grandmother will provide structure and stability, and perhaps some distance will give you perspective." I looked at Karen, who was watching me with cold calculation behind her mask of concern. She had won. She had successfully convinced my father that his own daughter was unstable and dangerous, clearing the way for her perfect new family without the inconvenient reminder of his previous life. "This is not about my behavior," I said quietly. "This has never been about that. This is about erasing Mum and me from your life, so you can pretend your new family is the only one you have ever had." Dad flinched, as if I had struck him, but Karen placed a hand on his arm, steadying him against my words. "Pack your essential items," she instructed, her voice clipped and efficient now that the decision was announced. "We can ship the rest of your things later." I fled to my room, or what remained of it, and collapsed onto my bed. Madison's side of the room was empty, her belongings temporarily removed, I realized, to protect her from her dangerous stepsister. The final humiliation. Through my tears, I noticed something else. My desk drawers were partially open, their contents disturbed. Someone had been searching my room again, planting evidence, or looking for more ammunition to use against me. The invasion of privacy felt like a physical blow. I pulled out my phone to call Zoe, but found it had no service. When I tried the house Wi-Fi, my access had been blocked. They were already isolating me, cutting off my support system before shipping me across the country. That night, I cried until I had no tears, left my face pressed into my pillow to muffle the sounds. No one came to check on me, to ask if I was okay, or if I needed anything. Not my father, not Karen, not the siblings I had tried so hard to welcome. In the darkness of my room, surrounded by the remnants of a life being systematically dismantled, I made a promise to myself I would never again allow someone else to define who I was or determine my worth. If I had to rebuild my life from nothing, I would do it on my own terms. I could not have known then how completely that promise would shape the next 19 years of my life, or that the path to healing would eventually lead me back to face the very people who had broken my heart. The trip to Boston was a silent nightmare. Dad drove me to the airport, Karen and the children conspicuously absent for this final farewell. We barely spoke during the ride, the gulf between us now seeming unbridgeable. At security, he gave me an awkward hug and handed me an envelope containing some cash. "Your grandmother will help you open a bank account," he said, his eyes focused somewhere over my shoulder. "I will deposit your allowance monthly." Allowance? as if this forced relocation were a normal arrangement rather than an exile. "When can I come home?" I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice, but needing to know if the separation had an end date. Dad hesitated. "Let us see how things go. Get settled in first. Focus on school." Kokesu. Non-answers that told me everything I needed to know. There was no plan for my return. As I watched him walk away without looking back, I realized that the father I had known, the one who had promised to always be there for me after Mum died, was gone. Whether Karen had changed him or merely revealed his true character, the result was the same. I was alone. Grandma Sarah was waiting at baggage claim in Boston, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture still straight despite her 70 years. When she saw me, her face so like my mother's, but with deeper lines of experience, crumpled briefly before she composed herself and opened her arms. I fell into her embrace, breathing in her familiar scent of gardenia perfume and mint tea, allowing myself to feel safe for the first time in years. "My sweet girl," she murmured into my hair. "What have they done to you?" In her small but immaculate apartment in Cambridge, I slowly began to tell the whole story. Unlike my father, Grandma Sarah listened, without judgment, asking occasional clarifying questions, but never doubting my account. "Your mother would be furious," she said when I had finished, her hands trembling with suppressed anger. "She would never have allowed this to happen." "Dad said Mum would understand they had to protect Madison and Tyler," I replied, repeating the justification he had given during our final argument. Grandma Sarah's eyes flashed. "Your mother knew who you are, Angelina, a sensitive, thoughtful girl who processes her pain through words, not violence. This Karen woman has poisoned your father's mind." Hearing someone else affirm what I knew to be true released something tight within my chest. I was not crazy. I was not dangerous. I was a 16-year-old girl who had lost her mother and then been systematically pushed out of her home by a manipulative stepmother and a father too weak or too selfish to see through the deception. The next few weeks were a blur of practical arrangements. Grandma enrolled me in the local high school, helped me find a therapist who specialized in grief and family trauma, and created a space for me in her home that respected my privacy and autonomy. Dr. Jenkins, my therapist, was nothing like the family counselor Karen had selected. In our first session, she told me bluntly, "What happened to you was a form of emotional abuse. Your feelings of anger and betrayal are entirely justified. That validation was the first step in my healing process." Rather than being told to adjust my attitude or consider others' feelings, I was encouraged to acknowledge and process my own pain. Through weekly sessions, I began to untangle the web of gaslighting and manipulation that had made me doubt my own experiences. Meanwhile, high school in Cambridge presented both challenges and opportunities. Being the new girl halfway through junior year was difficult, especially with my Midwestern accent and reserved demeanor. But Boston had a vibrant arts community, and I soon found my place on the school literary magazine, where my writing skills were appreciated rather than dismissed. My first attempt to contact Dad came a month after my arrival. I called on a Sunday afternoon, hoping to catch him alone, but Karen answered. The conversation was brief and chilling. "Your father is not available," she said, her voice cold. "We think it is best to give you space to adjust to your new environment without confusing contacts from home. Can you tell him I called?" I asked, hating how small I sounded. "Of course," she replied in a tone that made it clear she would do no such thing. I tried again, 2 weeks later this time, calling his cell phone directly. It went straight to voicemail, suggesting he had either blocked my number or was screening my calls. I left a message saying I was doing well in school and missed him. He never called back. After 3 unanswered letters and several more ignored calls, Grandma Sarah gently suggested I focus my energy elsewhere. "He has made his choice, Angelina," she said, her eyes sad but voice firm. "You cannot force someone to be the parent you deserve." So I threw myself into building a new life. I joined a creative writing group at the local library, made friends with a group of theatre kids who appreciated my ability to help polish their scripts, and spent hours walking the historic streets of Boston, finding solace in a city that had existed long before my problems and would continue long after. I graduated high school with honors and earned a partial scholarship to Boston University to study communications. Grandma Sarah insisted on covering the remaining costs from her savings. "Your mother would want you to have this opportunity," she said when I protested. "And frankly, your father should be paying for your education, but since he is not, I will." College opened new worlds for me. I discovered a talent for strategic communication and media planning that went beyond my creative writing abilities. I secured internships at local marketing firms and built a portfolio that impressed potential employers. I made friends who knew nothing about my past, who saw me as the confident, ambitious woman I was becoming, rather than the broken, discarded girl I had been. Throughout those years, I maintained minimal contact with my father. Obligatory birthday and Christmas calls dwindled to text messages, then to nothing. I heard through Grandma Sarah, who occasionally spoke with family friends in Chicago, that Tyler had gotten into trouble with drugs in high school, but was now doing better. Madison had gone to community college. Karen had started a small marketing business that my father helped finance. I told myself I did not care that they were strangers who happened to share some legal connection to me. But in quiet moments, the pain of rejection would resurface the question, why was not I enough, echoing in my mind despite years of therapy and self-work. After college, my career advanced rapidly. I started as an assistant at a boutique PR firm, moved to a larger agency as an account manager, then jumped to the corporate side, handling media relations for a tech company. By 30, I was the director of communications for one of Boston's fastest-growing media companies. When the CEO announced plans to expand nationally, opening offices in major markets across the country, I volunteered to oversee the Chicago launch. Part of me wanted to prove I could return to the city of my childhood as a success, no longer the discarded daughter, but a powerful professional in my own right. "Are you sure that is a good idea?" my longtime boyfriend James asked when I told him about the opportunity. "There is a lot of history there for you." "Maybe it is time to face that history," I replied, surprising myself with the realization that I was ready to confront the past rather than continue running from it. The Chicago office launched successfully, and within 2 years, I was promoted to Senior Vice President of National Media Operations. When our CEO announced his retirement, the board unanimously selected me as his successor. At 35, I became one of the youngest female CEOs in the industry. The day after the announcement, as I sorted through congratulatory emails, a familiar name stopped me cold: Karen Reynolds. The subject line read, "Job Inquiry." 19 years had passed since I left Chicago, forced out of my childhood home by a woman who had convinced my father I was dangerous. 19 years of building myself up from the broken 16-year-old girl who cried herself to sleep on an airplane, wondering what she had done to deserve such complete rejection. Now that same woman was applying for a position in my company, apparently unaware of who I had become. I clicked open the email with trembling hands. "Dear Ms. Crawford," it began using my mother's surname, which I had reclaimed legally at 18. "I am writing to express interest in the marketing director position at your Chicago office. With over 15 years of experience in marketing and client relations, including running my own boutique agency for 7 years, I believe my skills align perfectly with your needs." The email continued in standard cover letter format, highlighting Karen's experience and achievements. What it did not mention was any recognition of who I was or our shared history. Either she had not made the connection between Angelina Crawford, CEO, and Angelina, the stepdaughter, she had methodically removed from her perfect family picture, or she was gambling that I would not remember or care after all these years. Both possibilities were laughable. I forwarded the email to my assistant with a brief note: "Schedule an interview with this candidate for when I am next in Chicago. Do not mention my name or involvement." Then I began my research. Through social media industry contacts and our company's background check services, I pieced together Karen's life since I had left. The small marketing business she had started with my father's financial backing had initially done well, focusing on local retailers and service businesses. But about 7 years ago, it had failed during an economic downturn. Around the same time, Karen and my father had divorced, ending their 15-year marriage. Madison had graduated from community college and was now an elementary school teacher in Wisconsin, married with a young daughter. Tyler had struggled more with several rehab stints in his history, but appeared to be stable now, working as a manager at an electronics store. And my father, he had downsized to a small apartment after the divorce, continuing to work at the same accounting firm, but no longer in a senior position. He had no social media presence, and according to public records, no new relationships since Karen. He had grown old alone, perhaps finally facing the consequences of his choices. 2 weeks later, I flew to Chicago for quarterly meetings at our regional office. The interview with Karen was scheduled for my final day in town, giving me time to prepare mentally for the encounter. When she walked into the conference room, I was struck by how time had changed her. The carefully maintained blonde hair was now grey at the temples, the confident posture slightly stooped. She still maintained the veneer of professional polish, but there was a weariness to her that had not been there when she was systematically destroying my relationship with my father. Our HR director, Alicia, handled the introductions, watching curiously as Karen took a seat across from us. I had not told Alicia about my history with this particular candidate, preferring to keep the encounter professional. "Mrs. Reynolds," Alicia began, "thank you for coming in today. We were impressed with your background in local marketing, which is exactly what we need as we expand our Chicago presence." Karen nodded confidently. "Thank you for the opportunity. I have followed your company's growth and admire your approach to media integration. Tell us about your experience managing diverse teams," I said, speaking for the first time, watching her face carefully. Karen launched into a well-rehearsed answer about her leadership style, but as she spoke, her eyes kept returning to my face with growing uncertainty. I could see the gears turning, the vague recognition struggling to solidify into certainty. Midway through her response, she faltered. "I am sorry, but have we met before? You seem very familiar." I smiled the same practiced cold smile she had once directed at me across our dining room table. "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds, we have definitely met before. I am Angelina Crawford, Thomas Crawford's daughter." The colour drained from her face. "Angelina, but I did not... Your name..." "I reclaimed my mother's surname after I turned 18, I explained calmly. "One of many changes I made after being sent away from my home, because my stepmother convinced my father I was dangerous to her children." Karen's eyes darted to Alicia, who was watching the exchange with professional neutrality but obvious interest. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Karen suggested, her composure visibly cracking. "Alicia is aware that I am conducting this interview personally due to special circumstances." I lied smoothly. "Please continue with your answer about team management." Karen tried to recover, stumbling through the remainder of her response while avoiding my eyes. When she finished, I consulted the notes in front of me. "Your resume mentions owning Reynolds Marketing Group from 2014 to 2020. What led to the closure of that business?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Market conditions were challenging during that period. We lost several key clients and could not recover the revenue." "Interesting. My understanding is that the business was primarily funded by my father using money from the sale of our family home, the home my mother had chosen and loved. Is that correct?" Karen's face flushed. "That was a private family matter." "Yes, family matters often are private," I agreed. "Like the private family matter of fabricating evidence that a 16-year-old girl was threatening her step-sibling so she could be removed from her home. That is not what happened," Karen protested weakly. "There were legitimate concerns about your behavior." "Were there?" "Because Madison does not seem to think so." Karen's head snapped up. "You have spoken to Madison." "Not yet," I admitted. "But social media is revealing." She posted quite an interesting reflection last Mother's Day about truth and reconciliation and acknowledging past wrongs. It made me wonder what she might have to say about those notes supposedly written in my handwriting. The silence that followed was heavy with 19 years of unspoken truths. Finally, Karen spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was a difficult situation for everyone. Thomas was still grieving your mother. The children were adjusting to a new home. You were angry about the changes. So you decided the solution was to get rid of me entirely." I kept my voice level, professional, despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "To convince my father his daughter was so disturbed she needed to be sent across the country." Karen looked down at her hands. "I never expected him to cut ties with you completely. That was his decision. A decision heavily influenced by your narrative about me," I countered. "A narrative you constructed and reinforced until he believed his own daughter was a threat." Alicia cleared her throat gently, reminding us both that this was ostensibly a job interview. I straightened in my chair and returned to my notes. "Your application indicates you have been freelancing for the past 3 years with diminishing client returns. Is that accurate?" Karen nodded, seemingly relieved by the return to professional topics. "The market has been challenging post-pandemic. And your divorce from my father was finalized 5 years ago, correct? After his investment in your business resulted in significant financial losses." Her eyes widened at my knowledge of her personal affairs. "Yes, though I fail to see how that is relevant to my qualifications." "I am assessing your judgment and decision-making skills, Mrs. Reynolds, both critical qualities for the position you are seeking." The remainder of the interview proceeded with a surreal formality. I asked standard questions about marketing strategies and industry trends. Karen provided competent, if uninspired, answers, her earlier confidence shattered by the revelation of who I was and how much I knew. As the interview concluded, Alicia excused herself, leaving us alone in the conference room. The moment the door closed, Karen's professional facade crumbled completely. "Are you enjoying this?" she asked bitterly. "Watching me humiliate myself for a job I now know I have no chance of getting." I studied her. This woman who had once held so much power over my life and happiness. In my darkest moments of adolescent pain, I had imagined confronting her screaming accusations, making her suffer as I had suffered. But sitting across from her now, I felt none of the vindictive satisfaction I had anticipated. Instead, I felt something unexpected clarity. "Actually, Karen, you are qualified for this position. Your local market knowledge is exactly what we need, and your experience aligns with our requirements." Confusion crossed her face. "What? I am offering you the job," I said, surprising myself almost as much as her. "With 2 conditions." "What conditions?" she asked suspiciously. "First, you will acknowledge in writing what you did to me. The manipulation, the lies, the forged notes. Everything. Not for public disclosure, but for my personal records." Her face paled. "And the second condition, you will help me reconnect with my father, not by forcing him, but by telling him the truth about what happened all those years ago." Karen stared at me in disbelief. "Why would you offer me anything after what happened? You should hate me." I considered her question carefully before answering. "I did hate you for many years. That hatred nearly destroyed me until I realized it was giving you power over my life long after you should have had any. This is not about forgiveness, Karen. It is about finally closing a chapter that has been left unfinished for too long. And if I refuse, then you walk out of here with nothing and I continue my life as a successful CEO while you struggle to rebuild yours. Your choice." She was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Madison has been asking questions," she finally said, "about what really happened with you. She remembers things differently than what Thomas and I told her." "What did she remember?" I asked, my heart beating faster. "She remembers being scared, but not of you. She told me recently that she remembers me coaching her on what to say about you. She was 8, Angelina. She did what adults told her to do." The confirmation of what I had always suspected hurt more than I expected, despite years of therapy and personal growth. I had been right all along. The injustice of it threatened to overwhelm me, but I maintained my composure. "Tyler?" I asked. Karen sighed heavily. "He was more involved. Old enough to understand what was happening, young enough to go along with it. He has his own demons now. And my father, did he ever suspect the truth?" "I think part of him did," she admitted. "After you were gone, he would sometimes look at your old photos when he thought I wasn't watching. He kept your room untouched for almost a year. But admitting he had been wrong would have meant facing what he had done to you. And I think that was too painful for him. Too painful for him. Not a thought for how painful it had been for his 16-year-old daughter, abandoned by the one parent she had left. "I will accept your conditions," Karen said finally. "I will write everything down, and I will talk to Thomas. He should know what you have accomplished, despite everything." I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the conversation. "Alicia will send the offer letter tomorrow. We can discuss the details of your written statement then." As Karen gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. "For what it is worth, I am sorry. Not just because I need this job, but because what I did was unforgivable. I was so desperate to create my perfect family that I destroyed yours in the process." I did not respond, unwilling to offer the absolution she clearly sought. Some actions cannot be undone with mere apologies, no matter how sincere. Some wounds leave scars that remain even after the pain has subsided. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in that city was the house I had grown up in, now occupied by strangers. Somewhere was my father living with the consequences of his choices. And somewhere was the ghost of the girl I had been finally being acknowledged after years of being erased. 3 months after Karen began working at our Chicago office, I received an email from Madison Reynolds, now Madison Caldwell. She was direct and unflinching in her request to meet the next time I was in Chicago. "I need to tell you what really happened," she wrote. "I have carried this for too long." We met at a quiet cafe near my hotel. She was 27 now, with the same curly hair, but her mother's sharp features softened by a gentleness in her expression that Karen had never possessed. "Thank you for meeting me," she began. I have thought about trying to find you for years, but I was afraid of what I might discover. Afraid you would hate me for what I did. You were 8 years old, I reminded her, a child manipulated by adults. But I am not 8 anymore, she countered. I have had years to come forward with the truth, and I did not until now. She told me everything confirming what Karen had admitted, but adding details that only a child would have observed. How her mother had coached her to cry when questioned about me. How she had been instructed to tell her father that I had shown her scary notes. How Tyler had helped their mother plant those forged notes in my desk. I remember being confused about why we were doing it, she said. Mum told us it was for our safety, that you resented us for taking your dad's attention. I believed her because, well, she was my mum. Madison's voice cracked on the last word, and I realized she was carrying her own burden of betrayal. Her mother had used her as a weapon against an innocent teenager, damaging her ability to trust her own perceptions and memories. Have you spoken with your brother about this? I asked. She nodded. Tyler has been in therapy for years. His substance abuse issues stem partly from the guilt he feels about what happened to you. He was old enough to know what we were doing was wrong, but too young to stand up to our mother. Madison slid an envelope across the table. He wrote this for you. He could not come himself, not yet, but he wanted you to have it. I took the envelope, but did not open it, saving that for a moment when I would be alone and better prepared for whatever it contained. And my father? I asked the question that had haunted me for 19 years. Have you spoken to him since Karen told him the truth? Madison's eyes filled with sympathy. I tried. We both did, Tyler and I. But he is not well, Angelina. The truth about what happened with you coming after the failure of his marriage and financial losses from Mum's business, it broke something in him. He refuses to see anyone connected to that period of his life, even us most of the time. I had imagined many scenarios for a potential reunion with my father over the years, but never this or that when finally confronted with his failure to protect his daughter, he would retreat rather than seek reconciliation. He lives alone, I asked. Yes, a small apartment on the north side. He still works part-time at the accounting firm, but he has become a shadow of himself. Despite everything, a flicker of the daughter I had once been stirred within me. I would like to see him. Madison looked uncertain. He might not receive you well. The guilt? I need to try, I said firmly. Not for his sake, but for mine. To finally close this chapter of my life. The following day, I stood outside a nondescript apartment building, gathering my courage, before pressing the buzzer for apartment 307. There was no answer, but as I turned to leave, an elderly resident exiting the building held the door for me. Taking it as a sign, I made my way to the 3rd floor. I knocked on door 307, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard in the hallway. After what seemed like an eternity, the door opened a crack, revealing a face I barely recognized. My father had aged far beyond his 65 years. His hair was completely grey, his face deeply lined, his shoulders stooped as though carrying an invisible weight. When he registered who stood before him, his eyes widened in shock. Angelina, his voice was raspy, disbelieving. Hello, Dad. I said the familiar term, feeling strange on my tongue after so many years. He stood frozen, one hand gripping the door frame as if for support. How did you find me? Madison told me where you live. May I come in? He hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door wider. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but meticulously clean. On a bookshelf in the corner, I spotted something unexpected, a framed photo of me at 13, taken shortly before Mum got sick. It was the only personal touch in the otherwise sterile space. We sat awkwardly in his small living room, decades of absence stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. Karen told me what she did, he finally said, his voice hollow. About the notes, about coaching Madison to lie. I nodded, waiting for more. An apology perhaps, or an explanation for why he had been so quick to believe the worst of his daughter. I do not expect you to forgive me, he continued, staring at his hands. I failed you in the worst possible way. Yes, you did. I agreed not to be cruel, but because the truth needed acknowledgement after being buried for so long. You chose to believe I was capable of threatening children rather than considering that your new wife might be manipulating you. He flinched but did not deny it. After your mother died, I was lost. Karen seemed to offer a way back to a normal life, a complete family. I wanted that so badly that I ignored the signs that should have been obvious. Signs like her systematic campaign to erase Mom's presence from our home. like her constant criticism of me while presenting herself as the perfect mother to her own children, like her controlling every aspect of our family life. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely audible. All of that, I see it clearly now looking back. But then, I just wanted the pain to stop. I wanted to believe I could have happiness again. At any cost, I added. Even if that cost was me. He looked up, then meeting my eyes directly for the first time. I have replayed that day in my mind thousands of times. The day we told you that you were being sent away. I keep thinking that if I had just questioned Karen more, if I had trusted my instincts about who you truly were, everything would be different. For both of us, I said. A heavy silence fell between us. Through the window, I could hear the sounds of Chicago traffic life, continuing as it always had, while we sat frozen in a moment 19 years overdue. You have done well for yourself, he said eventually. Madison told me you are a CEO now. Your mother would have been so proud. The mention of Mom from his lips felt like a violation after the way he had allowed her memory to be erased from our home. But I swallowed my anger, recognizing that this conversation needed to happen if I was ever to be truly free of the past. I built my life without you, I told him. I had to, but I never stopped wondering why I was not enough for you to fight for. His eyes filled with tears. It was never about you not being enough, Angelina. It was about me not being strong enough, not being the father you deserved after your mother died. I failed her as much as I failed you. We talked for over 2 hours, unraveling the tangled threads of our shared history. There were no easy resolutions, no tearful embrace that magically healed 2 decades of absence. But there was at last truth between us. As I prepared to leave, he asked hesitantly, "Will I see you again?" I paused at the door, considering. I do not know. I need time to process all of this. But I will not disappear from your life the way you disappeared from mine. That is not who I am. In the weeks that followed, I focused on integrating this new reality into my life. Karen continued to work effectively at our Chicago office, our professional interactions cordial but distant. Madison and I began a cautious friendship, bonding over our shared experience as pawns in her mother's manipulations. Tyler reached out by email after I responded to his letter, his messages filled with remorse, but also hope for some kind of resolution. As for my father, we established a fragile connection through occasional phone calls and emails. Not the relationship we might have had without Karen's interference, but something new and tentative that acknowledged both our shared past and the separate lives we had built during our years apart. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. There were days when anger would resurface, moments when the injustice of what had been done to me felt as fresh as it had when I was 16. But those moments became less frequent as I continued to build a life defined by my choices rather than by others' betrayals. Dr. Jenkins, who remained my therapist through virtual sessions even after I left Boston, helped me navigate the complex emotions of reconciliation without minimizing the harm that had been done. Healing does not mean pretending the wound never existed, she reminded me during a particularly difficult session. It means acknowledging the scar while refusing to let it limit your life. Grandma Sarah, now in her late 80s but still sharp as ever, was more direct in her assessment when I called to tell her about meeting my father. "You always were stronger than him," she said, "just like your mother. The question is not whether you can forgive him, Angelina, but whether forgiveness will free you to live more fully." And that ultimately was the choice I faced, to remain tethered to the past by resentment or to acknowledge what had happened while refusing to let it determine my future. I chose freedom, not by forgetting or excusing what had been done to me, but by recognizing that my worth had never been dependent on my father's ability to see it, or Karen's willingness to accept it. The 16-year-old girl who had been sent away from her home had grown into a woman who created her own definition of family success and belonging, a woman who had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is not revenge, but the refusal to be defined by someone else's limitations. My name is Angelina Crawford. I am 35 years old, and my story did not end when I was cast out of my childhood home. That was just the beginning of a journey toward a life more authentic and complete than the one that was taken from me. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and resilience. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful growth happens after the deepest wounds. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find peace on your own journey, whatever obstacles you may face.